Okay, today we're talking about sales consistency of sales, right? It's a topic that not many people talk about. It's not that complicated, but there's different layers to it, right? So my perspective and my angle today will be about speaking about sales consistency from a company perspective, right? There's a whole bunch of things that you need to consider about consistency. Now, why consistency and what is it? Consistency is what underpins the growth of a company, right? How does it do that? A couple of ways. You need consistent revenue to scale a company. If you were to divest and invest money back into the business, it needs to be at a certain ratio for that to be consistent. For that to be consistent, sales need to be consistent. For wages to be purchased and for growth with those wages and those teams, it needs to be consistent. Because when you get consistency, then you can experience growth. It's very hard to get growth when you're being very inconsistent in terms of revenue for the company that underpins, that's the foundation for everything, right? So it's a super critical point to consider, but more so it's an important strategy to think about, right? So when you're putting your P&L together, when you're putting your forecast together over a certain time horizon, whether it be 1 to 3 years, 5, whatever it may be, doesn't matter, no harm, no foul, you have to think about what percentage of growth do you want month on month, right? Quarter on quarter, year on year. And then you plan, you bring it backwards, then you work in reverse. How do we do that? Without being consistent in revenue, it's very, very hard to do that. What happens is if you can't maintain consistency, the CEO, the founder, the board, everyone gets stressed out. It's very hard to be productive. It's certainly very hard to grow. And there's simple things that play into that matrices is that when you employ staff to grow, when you're having a good quarter, then you have a bad quarter, you have to get rid of those staff because you can't afford to pay for them. So how can you ever get consistency? It becomes a very stressful situation. Commercially, it's also very dangerous. So it becomes very high risk. For me personally, I like to run a P&L that's clean. I like OPEX to be covered. Plus I want a margin on top of my OPEX. That's how I look at my operational expenditure. I have standing charges and fixed expenses. I want to make sure that I have those covered and that I'm way ahead. I want a year's worth of salary in the bank. I want a year's worth of superannuation, 401k in the bank. I want all that stuff paid for. And I don't want to touch it because that underpins security for the business. So when you have inconsistency, you've covered consistency and investment, right? That's the only way you can get around it, is to have money in the bank. To get money in the bank though, is you need sales consistency. Because I always say the market is the market. When it comes to sales, you have good months, good quarters, and bad ones. So in your P&L and your forecasting and your targeting, you have to consider that, and you have to cater for it, right? Now the only way that you can do that is if I did a graph like this, right, and this was your sales. There's going to be a common thread through that. It's going to go like that, right? So this will be your OPEX. I'll put OPEX here. Right, so when you get into a negative situation here, that you have cash in the business to carry it, and then you replace it with this. Simple, very, very simple. This is going to happen, by the way. The only way that you can overcome this section here is to diversify. So if I was to consider in a simple format, I'll go for 12 months. I have 2 downturns. Let's take this one out. I have 2 downturns in the year, right? 2 quarters that are low, and I have 2 quarters that are high. I need to forecast that across that time horizon. And then when I do my forecast, right, which is my target, and a forecast is just a forecast, by the way, it can change, right? But I need a year's worth of data extrapolated over that time horizon to be able to get some solid numbers on my market and on my business. So when that goes down, you can cater for that for when the market is back up again. Now, what happens when you do that is it balances out to 0. So what that means is there's negative growth in that section because you're just balancing things out over that year. So now you need a strategy is, okay, how do I, if that was say negative 100 and this was positive 100, you end up with negative growth. So how do I make this positive 200 and then your growth is positive 100? So this is what I'm referring to about sales consistency. First, if you got that consistent vector across that where you're at, you may be at 0, that's okay, no harm, no foul. You cover your OpEx, you might make a little bit of profit. Now, how do you grow sales and make it consistent? Lead flow equals deal flow. You got to have consistent leads, 100%. If you don't have consistent leads, you can never have consistency of sales, ever. So figure out what you're going to do there. You need a budget, where you're going to get the leads from, what type of lead is it, how long does it take to nurture it, all that sort of stuff you have to think about. Good sales manager can bring that to the table. So you got to think about lead flow. Consistency of lead flow will deliver consistency of revenue. You've got to figure out what the algorithm is to convert it and what your conversion rate should be for that market and for that agent, for the company, for the product. But once you've got that, that's okay. It'll take a little bit of time to figure that out. Normally it takes about 12 months. So, if you're a startup business, you do need 12 months to run the P&L to really get a good feel of the market, unless you've been there before. If you're new to the market, 12 months would be all you need to get 12 months worth of data. Number two, CRM. All right, so software. The leads have to go somewhere. To be consistent in deal flow, to be consistent in lead flow, you need a good CRM system. By the way, invest in that. It's worth it. If you're in startup and you don't have any money, go find some. Because you're gonna keep breaking every month if you don't have that. Because that'll generate all of your reporting. It'll be the user interface for the agent. It'll give you all the data you need after 12 months if you're new to be able to create better consistency in your company and in your sales flow. So you need a really good CRM. And the other thing, what you need around that is you need process. Which, seems pretty much common sense. The thing about common sense, it's not so common these days. And the problem I find in sales teams is that these two actually lack. So most guys are using Salesforce or HubSpot, I get it. But when they set it up, they don't set it up with how they should be running the company. They set it up on what they think they should be doing instead of what they should be doing, if that makes sense. Let me rephrase that, because that didn't make any sense. Even I didn't know what I was talking about. That was weird. So the thing about these two systems here is that most companies, they don't know how to set their CRM up properly. So we're going through a change in CRM systems now because we know that it can add growth and scalability to the business. Right? And we have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of leads in our lead flow in our current CRM. We need better reporting, better transparency around our deal flow. So we're upgrading and we're investing in that. It costs a lot of money, right? But it's worth it. If you want consistency of sales, you need good data and you need good systems, right? You just have to invest in that. What underpins that is the company providing the right process, right? So if you have I'm specifically talking about a human sales team, not e-commerce at this time. So we have a human sales team. So the human sales team need to follow the process in alignment with how the CRM was built. And some people don't do that. What they do is they build the CRM to a capacity of efficiency of about 1/3. They never go back to it or continually improve it because they're running so fast. And then they throw a sales team at it, and the sales team don't know how to use the CRM properly. And what they do is when they train the CRM at a capacity, when they built it at 33% efficiency, not 90, but 33%, they layer the sales team on top of the CRM without a process, and then the salespeople using the CRM are also inefficient. So your inefficiency with your lead flow compounds, and you just lose money. I would invest heavily in strategy and planning around these elements, these first 3 elements of creating consistent deal flow and sales revenue in a business. Because without it, it just becomes a bit of a red hot mess. Because you'll be surprised the amount of revenue that's lost in businesses that I see that don't know how to do this properly, right? Especially startup businesses. And there's some old school businesses, right? Bricks and mortar businesses especially, and those old school sales businesses who have a big sales component to them, they invest so much time in the emotional management of a sales team, they don't understand that technically they're losing revenue because their systems, their processes, and their workflows are a mess, and they don't know how to fix it. And over a period of time, you get to a point where you just don't even think about it anymore. It just becomes part of how the company operates and part of the company culture. Well, I think if you can apply 1% continual improvement strategies and efficiencies in a business every quarter your revenue goes up. And that's how I think consistency can occur without focusing just on sales. So your leads could be terrible, but with this 1, 2, 3 strategy and getting that right, it doesn't really matter. Right? I just don't think it matters that much. Does the quality of the lead matter? Yeah, of course it does. I'm not saying it doesn't. But this consistency is underpinned by technology, systems, and process. It's not underpinned by management. Right? So it's execution of the startup of deal flow to maintain sales consistency. I'm going to put a line there because that's just the strategy, right? You got to get that right. And if you don't know how to do it, figure it out or go find someone who does. It's pretty fucking simple. It's not very complicated. Cool. All right. So the next thing is, I'm going to put 4 here. Would be training. Training should be ongoing, and I'm not talking about sales training. I'm going to put here not sales training. Sales training is an element for me that is unmeasurable. And people go, oh, Lawrence, that doesn't make sense. But if our sales are $10,000 and they go to $20,000, it must be working. Well, that's actually not correct. Because why? Because you can't measure it. What's that saying? You can only manage what you measure. You cannot measure sales training. You can't. You can look at the bottom line or the top line revenue or whatever you want to look at in that sales area, but you're not going to know where it comes from because sales training is the incorporation of many different elements. So which one is it? Come on, man. That's a really old style approach to selling. It doesn't work anymore. Because if you want to scale, right, you can't scale on the ethos or the practicality of that because it's not measured. It's like a billboard, dude. Unless you ask the customer, where did you hear about us, you're never going to know. So you don't know the investment in the billboard is actually working. So that is dangerous. So this training is not about sales. By the way, if you employ salespeople, why are you training them to sell? That means your recruitment process is wrong. Well, gee, that's logical, Lawrence. But you'd be surprised the amount of people that hire qualified sales executives and train them how to sell. But then they go, oh yeah, but it's about my product. Well, that's product training, not sales training. That is product training, people. But then they wrap up the sales training as part of it, right? Because they think it's going to add to this sales consistency. It actually doesn't. It probably decreases it in my mind. What I'm talking about is training on these 3 elements. CRM process. Using the CRM system as well as you can use it. Like just being so good at it. Like so good, you understand it and at a moment's notice. You're prepped for your calls. Your virtuals are on point. You know how to use the technology to share, take notes, do transcripts. Right? You know how to navigate the system, get to the lead that's the highest converting lead as fast as possible. That is where this comes from. It does not come from sales training. If you're hiring the right people, if you're not hiring the right people, you have to train them how to sell. You shouldn't be hiring salespeople. You should get someone else to do it for you. That's a waste of time. Complete waste of time. So you need to invest in sales training, so you need a training plan. Like we suffer from this, by the way. Like, man, I've made more mistakes than most people, right? And I'm still doing it. You know, but you just got to keep moving forward. That's what these videos are for, is to say, okay, I've made these mistakes. This is what I've learned and executed against, and I found that it works, right? And then I can talk about it, because I'm not here to talk about bullshit about someone else's ideas. We run through this in our own companies, and we test it, we beta test it, and then we know that it works. We look at the data, and then we execute against it, right? So training on this stuff here, which I call 1% training. I need to write that up. 1% training. I'm running out of room. This is a new whiteboard, by the way. It's so skinny. It's training. Now, I mentioned recruitment. I'm going to write that up here because I think that's pretty critical. Recruitment. Whew. I speak about this all the time. By the way, I have a background in recruitment, so I'm pretty connected to it. I think it's pretty important. I think it's all about recruitment. I think if you get that right, all of this comes pretty easily. Because like I said, if you're training people, your sales team how to sell, you've recruited the wrong people. And recruitment can be the single thing that puts your company out of business if you get it wrong. And recruitment is probably one of the most hardest things to get right. To be consistent with it, your recruitment systems need to be consistent. They need to be consistently generating good quality candidates. If you are recruiting people that are not consistent and recruiting good quality candidates, sales consistency will not occur. So this is all part of the same narrative, right? There's so many different things in that statement. It's not just selling. And in fact, I haven't actually talked about selling. Well, there's nothing in here that's directly related to selling. These are systems, right? So if you're recruiting salespeople to create sales consistency in your company every quarter, every year, you have to get your recruitment system consistent. So I would focus a lot of time on that. You don't need to use agencies to do it. If you want to, no harm, no foul, run at that. But what I'm saying is you just need to write down and understand. If you're trying to underpin consistency, like the 1%ers that deliver real consistency, which is lead flow, CRM, process, right? If I take CRM and process, what are you looking for in your recruitment process, right? So you're looking for people who have used the CRM maybe you're using before. So that should form part of the recruitment process. So if you're using HubSpot, recruit someone who's used HubSpot. Why? It makes your training more efficient. It gets the candidate there faster, right? And it lowers your risk and investment. Like, it's simple. But you have to apply strategic thinking to it. Right? Otherwise, it's just not going to work. You just run it, oh, I'm just looking for salespeople. No, you're looking for people who are experienced in sales that are underpinned by this to create consistency. Have they worked to processes before? How many years of experience do they have in a CRM? What do they understand about the market and the deal flow that they've been working with for the past 5 years, or whatever your benchmark will be? And recruit on the basis of that, at least add it to the recruitment process. Most people who recruit salespeople look for sales skills. All right? They don't recruit on CRM skills. God forbid we should do that, Jesus. So it's just part and parcel of the whole thing, right? If I break down the recruitment process like this, there's 4 sectors in it, and that pizza, one of them is sales, one of them is CRM. Why? Because it's the goddamn tool they use every second of the day. So why is it not part of the recruitment process? So don't miss that. I think it's super critical. Number 6 I'm going to put in is policy. Any company should have policies that underpin the company. If we're talking about sales consistency, that's no different, right? Because what happens is, if the sales team are not recruited, this section here, trained well, and the policy is part of the training, what happens is these guys get a little bit confused, right? So you need to have guardrails around the business, and the business is sales. And I'm just going to refer to it as its own business, because it is. It's generating all your revenue, it's sort of its own business. And it'll be different to operations, and it'll be different to marketing, and it'll be different to IT. And, you know, so it's got to have its own policy around it. If I put a box around that, like, sales consistency will come from all of these things together, not one thing alone, right? So these 2 things, underpin that by systems and policies. That looks like the Nike swoosh. Look at that. How good's that?
It does.
It does. Have you read that book?
Which one?
Was it Shoe Dog? Yeah, can't remember. Anyway. No, that's a movie. So policy, super critical to get it right. What's a policy in terms of maintaining sales consistency? So, okay, great. It's got your lead flow in it and your deal flow in it. How is that procured? Right? If an agent gets a deal and then it comes in and goes to another agent, what's your policy around that? Everyone needs to be very clear about it. Otherwise it shakes everybody and then sales consistency drops. Why? Because you lose people and you've got to re-recruit. By the way, when you lose someone who's high performing in a team, it's going to cost you 2x to replace that person, considering downtime and the loss of sales that will incur, not to mention salaries and commissions and all that sort of stuff, right? So you got to think about that. I think that's super critical. I'm a bit of a policy guy. You could say a policy Nazi. Can I say that? You can beat that out if that's a bit too much. Because this is creating framework, right? If I want to be consistent in sales, again, I have to do all this sort of stuff, and policy is great. Policy and process, they're two different things, by the way. Some people think they're the same, they are not. This is company orientated, that's specific and vertical. Company, specific and vertical. They could have their own policies for a group of people, which is the sales team, fine, but the process is how they operate. Standard operating procedures underpinned by policy. All right, I want to go to number 7, workflow. So if I was to think about consistency of sales, I need to understand through all of this how we work as a business, as a sales team. Like, what do we do every day and how do we do it? And then finding the algorithm that works over a time horizon once you've got all the data, and go, hey, I found out that if we do this every day for each person, we get a better result than if we do this. So it's A/B testing as you do that first year. And so that's why the CRM is so critical. And identifying the process, because when you get the process right, it creates the workflow. And then when you recruit people, you bring them in under your workflow. So you don't want someone coming into your business in sales who's going to run their own game and not follow your systems, because that'll make you inconsistent. Because how do they know that that works? And even if they're coming from a similar industry, I would guarantee you it's a different avatar. It's probably a different style of lead. They did whatever they want, and then they come into your business and they start doing that. And then what happens is your policies start to shake and your process has fallen over. You cannot be consistent in that market or in that space. You just can't. Isn't it funny when you think about consistency that it sort of affects everything? You have to be consistent with everything to get consistency of sales, to scale a business. By the way, I am talking about bootstrapping, but even if you go to the market to get funds, right? You're looking for investors, they want to see consistency. They just want to see that your revenue is consistent and that you're growing. Like, that's a good story and a good narrative for an investor. Because what does it tell them? It tells them, oh, these guys have got their shit together. They know what they're doing. Because if their revenue wasn't growing month on month in year 2, that tells me that there's a problem. And everything needs to be consistent. And we're only at 7 things, so it's not a great deal. Anyway, back to workflow. So workflow. Workflow is, Tommy comes into the business, I recruit Tommy, run him through our policies, do some training on the CRM and the process. I've got my lead flow organized now. What does he do every day? So I need to give him a strategy so he's successful. If I've done a year, I already have all the data, I know what that looks like. If I don't, I'm gonna use my experience skills, I'm gonna collaborate with people and come up with a concept that the workflow for each agent should be this for that product. The right time to call the customer. What do they do when they sit down at their desk first thing in the morning? What type of training do we do? Is there a training plan that underpins it? Right? If they haven't got any experience in CRM because I had to breach a recruitment process because I had to get someone in the seat, what's the workflow involving the training process for this individual to increase that metric? So I might need to change the workflow for this candidate and that candidate, but there should be a solid line of this is what you do to generate sales in this company, and here it is. Follow the policy and the process and don't break it. And then you'll become consistent. Because if you had a sales team, so if you had 10 sales agents, right, all doing the same thing based on tested data and research, you will become consistent and you'll win more often than not. Right, and then you make small 1% incremental improvements. I'm not saying, you can make, well, let me say this. don't make big changes. When you've got it working, just make small 1% incremental improvements, like iterate. You know, I see people making changes and being super reactive. Don't do that, man. When it comes to revenue, doesn't like too many changes, by the way. You know, it likes to go and camp there for 3 or 4 days, money. You know, but it much prefers to invest in a structure, build a house, and live there for 2 years. So just be careful, man. Don't run too fast around it, because you'll become inconsistent. And this whole narrative today's ep is about talking about consistency of sales. There's a little bit of a psychology to that. I don't want to get into it because this is more practical than anything else, but have your sales agents, your sales team, or your marketing strategy needs to have a workflow. What do we do with our lead flow to create deal flow? You know, how many times do we follow up? Do we do virtuals or a phone call? How many times do we call them? What messages do we leave? Do we use SMS as part of our strategy? So that's the workflow. Do I call my new leads in the morning and I book up appointments for the afternoon? And in the middle of the day for 1 hour, I do this. That's what I'm referring to. So you got to figure that one out. 8, KPI. Key performance indicators. It's a measuring stick. Consistency likes to be measured. Decisions come from measurement. Decisions come from research. Decisions come from data. It does not come from this thing, emotional sales training. It doesn't come from that. That's probably got some value. It doesn't have a lot of great value to me, but I like KPIs. As long as they're the right KPIs. If they're the wrong KPIs, they can be challenging for the business. Why? Because if they're not achievable, what happens to the human? The whole team just shakes. Oh, we can never reach our target. It tells me that the team or the company have got it wrong because they're not doing this. Because if you've got the right CRM and you're looking at the right data, if you've got your lead flow right and you've got good processes, the KPI should be achievable. And as you sort this out, you'll come to terms on what that KPI looks like. So, actually, here's a question I get a lot. Yeah, but what should the KPI be, Lawrence? Good question. It's different for everybody. And there's not a solid rule on it, right? But what you could do is extrapolate your data and look at what the team did after a year. If you don't have that luxury and you're a startup, you're just gonna have to figure it out. But you start low and work up, right? Like, do sales for 30 days, look at it, and then tweak it. Tell everybody you're doing it. You can't just, you know, change it without them realizing it, because if their KPIs are attached to commissions or bonuses and you keep changing it without good quality communication, that'll be a problem. So you sort of want to do that. But for me, a KPI should be your baseline. I'll put this here, baseline, plus, because if you want to scale, so this baseline creates your sales consistency. So for us, you know, an agent should make $15,000 every week, $60,000 a month on average. I know, like I've worked this out, we've been running long enough to know this, is that covers our OpEx with an average of gross 20% investment back to the company. If our sales team achieve that. The only way our sales team can achieve that is by doing this. If they don't do that, our investment back into the company 1 week may be 20%, and then the next week there is no investment. And then the next corner it's only 3%. And that's the consistency and inconsistency I'm referring to. So it's a compilation of many things, not just one. The KPI for me is the baseline that underpins the operational expenditure and gives you enough profit to put back into the company so it pays for itself, plus you make profit, all right? For me, it's this number. And then you want to add to it, right? Because if you want to have a KPI, you want to have a KPI that people can look forward to so they can increase their income. I always say this is individual. I never think KPIs, once you've got your baseline, like everyone has to do this. Everyone has to do 15K a week. No, because I know on research and data that that's the number. If you want to go above that to motivate people to look forward to earn more money every year, that has to be done individually. I don't think you can do it generically. Why? Because everyone's different. Not any two people are the same. Henry is. I saw a person the other day that looks exactly like him. He could have been your brother, actually. He's riding a bike. So that would be my take on that. It's just establishing the baseline. Look at what sort of gross profitability you want to make to support that statement of sales consistency. That would be my thing. Getting to the last couple of things, number 9 is management. Let me do this. Management. Super critical. So once all this is in place, someone needs to manage it. Are you right? Cool. Someone needs to manage it. Right, so you need a competent manager overseeing all of this. Now, is this the sales manager? I don't really know. Like, I think it's probably not. Remember I said in that last episode, you can recruit a sales manager 2 different ways. A psychological sales manager who does coaching and focused on scripting and tonality and all that sort of stuff. Or you can recruit a sales manager who is more focused on this, who's more analytical. I like the analytical guy because numbers don't lie. And I can measure numbers under this banner of KPI, right? And under this banner of sales consistency. And under this banner of training and CRM and process and workflow. I can manage it on numbers. I can't do it any other way. So I prefer analytics and an analytical mind than I do the sales mind. But that's for you to decide of your business. Every business is slightly different. But you need someone who's going to take responsibility for that. That's probably a better way to describe it. Who is going to take responsibility to ensure all that happens? In a startup, it's normally the founder because you're the janitor, you're the sales manager, you're the marketing guy, and you're the ops manager, right? The CFO, you're everything. But you have to get to a point where you have to split that up a little bit and start to employ people, right? Because I'm sorry, Tim Ferriss, the 4-hour work week, well, it's just not going to work, man. Like, you have to build a team and a culture. Okay, last one, 10. Whew. So I was going to put here monitor. There's a lot of words to describe this, but how do you now monitor all this to be consistent? A good place to do it is here. This will give you all the data you need. This will also give you all the data because that's going to come from the SaaS platforms you use for those two things, right? So that needs to be monitored for that to be consistent. That has to be followed to be consistent. You have to train with consistency. You have to recruit in a model with consistency. It's got to be underpinned by policy. That needs to be trained with consistency into the team. The workflow, what you do every day, has to be consistent. The KPIs, people have to achieve those consistently. Your manager has to be consistent in delivering all of that, and then you have to monitor it. How do you monitor it? Well, you just got to get all your reporting in play. What metrics are you going to report on? How frequently are you going to report on them? But more importantly, how do you execute against them? Because what I see is people look at reports all the time and do nothing. They talk about it, sit down, have coffee, have 2-hour meetings, talk about all these numbers and go, hey, we should do this. Or what, instead of, having shorter meetings and just executing against small things in a 1% fashion and do it in iterations, right? The thing about bureaucracy is what they do is they talk about stuff and then they have to go have meetings with other people and talk about it again. And then they have another meeting with another department and talk about it again and nothing ever gets done. That's how great taxpayer dollars at work there. But so you got to monitor it, run your fast reporting, look at it frequently. I look at things daily, actually. That doesn't mean you react to it, but you want to get a bit of a feel for where things are, right? So if you want consistency of sales, you do need to be reactive, because if sales go down, you need to act. You need to do that. So there'd be a percentage for me. Like if sales were down a little bit one day and then they went up a little bit and then they went down a little bit and then they went up a great deal, well then that's okay. If you run that line through that, it's still going to be relatively consistent. But if you get to the point where sales were down 20, 22%, well you want to react as soon as you get out of bed in the morning. What's wrong? What just happened? And it normally tells you that something happened with your lead flow. One of the ads fell over, it over-debited your card and then the ads turned off. That's normal practical stuff that you should look for. The reporting will tell you that. But you need to monitor it, and the manager should be responsible for all of that. That's the last box in the pizza, right? Box, it's a circle. That's the last tick in the circle. Is to monitor all of that, and that's how you get sales consistency. From my experience, this is real experience, this is not bullshit. I've had to learn all this over many years to get it right, over many different companies as well, and lost millions of dollars in the process, by the way. So, you know, it was a very expensive course for me, but that's what I learned. And we follow that today, right? So I hope that helps. Don't underestimate this thing, because if you don't see this, there's no point in doing it in the first place. Appreciate you watching and look forward to speaking to you next week.